All right, so last time we met, we took a look at how we can style different elements, and in particular, we were looking at how to configure their size, their position. Um, we saw that we can certainly change their color, foreground color, background color, and this was mostly for us to keep track on what is it that we were moving on the screen. We looked at that we can modify their size using the width or the height um, attribute. And here's an example where we can change the height of the elements. If you just so you notice the width here is being applied to a paragraph, which is a block element, right? And as we mentioned earlier, the block element behaves in such a way that by default it takes up the entire width of whatever you give it, right? Whatever the parent is, and whatever its content inside of the block element wraps. Okay, it behaves like an inline. So here we have a block element, right, which we have reduced its width, and all its content still behaves like an inline element and just wraps inside. Here we have an example of another block element that we've reduced its width, and we have reduced its height. It had wrapped inside, but it's being clipped with the content. Later on, we'll look at other ways that we can configure the behavior of the content inside of block elements. So, for instance, the behavior is that it's clipped, right? That it does not spill over, right? But you can configure it so that it does spill over, right? That you can do all sorts of things. We'll take a look at configuring that a little later. But default is just it clips the content when it doesn't fit. We also took a look at that we can modify the position. And there's different ways of modifying. We can modify either relative or static, absolute, right? There's fixed. Well, there's a whole bunch of attributes that configure how the behavior is of the position. Here we're saying that we want relative, meaning where you would normally fall, right? Wherever the browser normally would put you, right? I want you to now count this many pixels left, right, up, down. From the left, move 20 pixels. So from the left, it has moved over 20 pixels. Another thing is that whenever you start, mocking around and playing around with positions and whatnot, you're overriding what the browser would normally do, right? What the behavior of the browser would like to do with these elements. Yes. So some of the rules that we would expect, start falling apart. So you have to be careful, because you start moving things around, and everything around also moves, right? So it might have some unintended consequences, right? When you start moving just one element, it might affect how other elements render as well. You can here's an example of using both left and top. There's 4 of these. There's left, right, top, and bottom. Okay. The funny thing is when you provide both of them. For instance, it makes sense that if you provide just left and top, it's almost like an XY position. Yes, it behaves. You move vertically, and you move horizontally, and you position wherever you want. And that's what's happening here, right? We are moving it so that it 30 pixels up and 30 pixels over, 20 pixels over. And you start getting some weird behaviors when you apply both of them. Versus here, for instance, notice here we've taken out the width of the element, and instead we're providing both the left and the right. See that? Which is kind of weird. It says, well, do you want me to go left or do you want me to go right? If you provide both, right, it actually takes in the left-hand side. Says what call it's measured with the left-hand side of the elements. So you want the left element in this case is 0, and the right side of the element you want it at 0 as well. So measure from the right-hand side of the screen, and that has the effect of stretching, right? Of stretching the whole element, right? So it's stuck on either side of the screen of the window, right? Which is pretty cool to have some kind of some of these effects, which is pretty much the original behavior of a block element. Yes, but oftentimes it's used so that you can like offset certain elements, right? When you start having like a left-hand side, right-hand side, like a split screen, right? It's all very useful for those kinds of behaviors, which we'll be using a little later. Here, let's see. So this is another example where we're applying instead absolute instead of relative, right? So relative measures the position, the XY position, measures it from where it would normally fall, yes? Where the browser would want to put you. Instead, you can measure it against the absolute XY0 position from the top left corner of the entire window, right? That's absolute. So notice here we're moving at 50-50, right? So down and left, so there's 50 pixels from the corner, right, of the top of the screen, yes? And finally, there's one more. There's a sticky to achieve behavior such as a sticky element, an element that doesn't move, that doesn't scroll with the rest of the content, right? All of these, right? Absolute position, relative position, they all move, as you scroll the window, right? All the elements scroll together, yes? But you can override that by using the fixed position, right? Position fixed, meaning I'm going to put you, from the original position of 0, 0, 0 on the top left corner, right? But once you're positioned, right, I'm going to ignore any movements of the mouse, right? So if you scroll, I'm going to stick. I'm going to stay right where I am, right? So this is very useful, for instance, for putting headers at the top, right? So that they don't scroll with the rest of the content. That's very useful. Or headers, table headers, right? Those are also very useful. One word of advice though is that when you use position fixed, you remove the element from the normal flow of the rest of the content. Okay, in both position absolute and position relative, it still holds that it pushes elements, that the other siblings elements, right, that are around it. It still pushes them around. You're pushing them down, pushes them right. When you use position fixed, that is no longer true, right? It removes it from the normal flow of the elements, right? So it no longer pushes all the other elements away, yes, right? And that has a weird effect in that if you had content, lots and lots of content originally, now it's going to flow. It's going to kind of show like it's under the element, right? Because normally the header would have pushed the rest of the content down, yes. But when you remove it from the normal flow, it no longer pushes the other content down. See that, right? So what the effect is that you would see this flow under the header. So just a quick demo, we could see that. Let's see. Let's create here. Where we have that here. Let's click. Let's see. So let's for instance, this welcome to webdev. Let's create a file here with a sticky header example. So new file, and we'll call it save sticky. And let's just copy this content over here. No, that's not it. So let's remove this for a second. Let's see, when save this, I saved it already. Web app, and in the index file, we're just going to point to it now. Oops. LI. And we're going to point to, let's see, sticky. So here's sticky header. So the normal behavior, right? So let's remove this style right now. Let's remove this style for a second. Actually, let me just comment it out for a second. Let's comment that out. And if you have an H1 here, the normal behavior is that the header pushes the rest of the content, right? That's the normal behavior. Let's grab lots of content somewhere. Let's see, a lorem ipsum. So lorem ipsum is a very common dummy content that that folks in the publishing industry they use for when they have lots of they want to see how lots and lots of content renders on a piece of paper or an ad, and they don't actually have real content. So it's very common to just use this very well known dummy content just to see how it lays out. So I'm just going to paste it here, paste that. Especially because we want to see how it behaves when we have to scroll. Right now, everything scrolls together, right? And that's what we would expect. When instead we uncomment this, right? So what we're doing here is that instead of position absolute or position relative like we saw before, we're using position fixed, meaning I'm going to tell you where I want you, top 0. I want you stuck at the top, right? And I want you to be fixed, meaning ignore all the scrolls, right? Don't reposition yourself as the scroll bar moves up and down. Also, the margin. Let's remove the margin. Also, just want to show you that. Remove the margin, and let's remove also the white here, the background white. So if we refresh that, notice what the behavior is, right? The size and position header is now stuck at 0. And notice that it's transparent, right? The background is by default transparent, and this is not exactly what we want. But the weirdest thing is that notice the background, right? See, the content is no longer being pushed down, right? So we need to compensate for that, and the way we compensate for that is either we move individual elements down, right, to compensate for the width, for the height of the element that would have pushed down the content. We could do that individually, or we can just go to the top level body element that is a container of everything, yes, and push all the content down, right? So we can say body style, just push down everything from the top, push it down. Let's say 10 pixels, right? So let's refresh. Notice that it moved slightly. We would need to know what the actual size of the height of this is. So let's try 60. So it moves it down. So it's kind of doing what we want, right? We still have to push it a little bit down. Another thing that we want to fix is that it's transparent. So we don't want to see this text over text. So the style of the header we might want to fix it by putting a background color to have a white background. So no longer do we see the content behind it, but notice that above we can still see it, right? And the reason is that the header by default has a margin, right, that pushes the margin a little bit down. So we need to compensate for that by turning off that default margin. So margin, I don't want any margin. So it's truly stuck at the top. Okay. Notice that we're still clipping the bottom, right? So we might want to push down a little further. Or what we might want to do, right, is that text, no, white space, no wrap. So notice that one of the challenges here is that we don't want the height to change, perhaps, if we stick something at the top, right? Especially if you start moving and making the screen resize, right? And somehow, it used to be 60 pixels, but when you resize, right, it doesn't fit, it wraps, right? And it pushes even further, yes? So typically the header, we configure it by modifying the white space, the wrapping behavior, saying, no, you're not gonna wrap, right? Because there are other things that below you that depend on that height, right? So usually the sticky headers, we configure them to turn off wrapping, and we can say white space, no wrap. And now we have the enough space down below it so that it can scroll underneath. That makes sense, right? Usually we're not going to have to do this by hand like we're doing it right now. Usually we're going to be using libraries such as Bootstrap, materials, right? There's lots and lots of these libraries that already have classes, right, that configure these behaviors for us, right? But nevertheless, I want you to have a little bit of what happens behind the screens on how you achieve these kinds of behaviors. Okay. Where'd it go? Where is my, there we go. All right, let's take a look at floating.
Hi everyone, Jose here. Please remember to subscribe and like the video. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. Thank you.